非常感谢如是我们，感谢各位的支持。接下来呢，还有华尔街联报，华尔街联报包含的有这个严怀先生的进出新加坡监狱的连载，以及我们关注到的这样的被誉为前上海首富的周正毅，在前几年出狱之后呢，又下海了，做起了主播，身边呢又围满了主播。不过这一次大家感叹曾经的这个上海第一少，如今是有一些落魄了，这个都怎么回事呢？尽在华尔街联报。华尔街论坛明天会继续回归跟大家聊一聊非常热门的话题，我们不见不散。
大家好，欢迎来到我们的华尔街争议节目。今天我们要聊的是一个震撼世界的消息，中国一家名为空间交通的公司刚刚完成了其 Yongxing 原型机的测试飞行，这款飞机的速度竟然可以达到马赫4，是协和号的2倍。这不仅是对航空技术的一次重大突破，更是对全球航空市场的挑战。这家公司计划在2027年进行全尺寸超音速客机的首飞，届时将能在短短2小时内将乘客从北京送到纽约，这样的速度你敢想象吗？协和号自1976年服役以来一直是超音速飞行的代名词，而 Yongxing 的设计不仅速度更快，还能实现垂直起降，并且飞行高度将超过65000英尺。更有趣的是，这架飞机的设计灵感来自于石头划水的概念，这使得它在飞行过程中能够有效的滑翔，并在接近目的地时减速到亚音速，然后再进行垂直降落。这种创新的技术不仅令航空业界感到惊讶，也让我们对未来的航空旅行充满期待。此外，该公司还计划在2030年前实现高速度的全球商业运输，甚至希望将太空旅游的票价大幅降低，这将会改变我们对于太空旅行的看法。所以，这一切究竟会如何展开？ Yongxing 能否真正改变航空业的格局？请大家继续收看详细内容。在北京，总部位于此的航天运载公司近日宣布，他们成功完成了一次原型商用运输机的试飞。这架飞机的速度可达4马赫，相当于协和飞机速度的2倍。该公司的云型原型机在上周六成功进行了试飞，紧接着公司在星期日对外公布了这一振奋人心的消息。这家公司亦被称为凌空天行科技，计划在今年11月对其发动机技术进行进一步评估。令人振奋的是，航天运载目标在2027年前完成全尺寸超音速客机的首次试飞。根据航天运载的说法，这种新型客机将能在仅2小时内从北京飞抵纽约，飞行时速将超过音速的4倍。要知道，上一架服务于民用的超音速飞机是由法英航空公司联合开发的协和飞机，它自1976年投入使用，一直到2003年才退役，巡航速度为音速的2倍，搭载4台涡轮喷气发动机，能够进行水平起飞和降落，其飞行高度为6万英尺，约18300米。而今，云型超音速飞机在设计中融入了更多的航空航天技术，可达到2倍的速度，并进行垂直起降，飞行高度可达2万米，约65600英尺，展示了技术的飞跃。航天运载网站上的动画视频展示了云型的独特飞行方式，宛如一块被抛向天空的石头，灵感源自被誉为中国航天之父的钱学森提出的打水漂理论。动画中，云型被助推器送上天空后与其分离，并在达到目的地前长距离滑翔，最终通过液体火箭发动机的点火完成减速，实现垂直降落。航天运载公司不仅开发超音速飞行技术与服务，其成立于2018年的四川省，并在北京、西安及安徽省设有研发及制造中心，在新疆库尔勒设有测试基地。公司的研发计划包括技术验证平台、亚轨道太空旅游器及全球超音速飞行器，并向军队、大学及研究院提供超音速技术服务，与多所大学合作进行火箭开发和试飞，其中包括参与西北工业大学主导的飞天1号超音速飞机项目。该飞机于2022年成功完成试飞。周六，云型超音速飞机的多项关键技术接受了考验，包括空气动力学、热防护及控制系统。 空气动力学方面，云行具有高升阻比，随着飞行高度的增加和空气密度的减少，仍能保持高效性能，使飞行更加经济和舒适。热防护同样至关重要，在高速飞行中，飞机表面因空气动力加热温度超过1000摄氏度 1832 华氏度，轻质、高强度和耐热的材料和结构成为关键。公司表示，全复合结构在试飞中成功承受了这些极端条件。与此同时，原型机的飞行控制系统、航电设备及结构强度也获得了评估。航天运载的目标是开发能够用于全球商业航班及可负担太空旅游的超音速飞机。公司的副总裁沈海滨曾在2021年接受网易采访时表示，公司希望在2025年前开展首次在人亚轨道太空旅游飞行，到2030年实现高速全球交通。我们的目标是将太空旅游票价从维珍银河的45万美元降低至45万人民币，约合63180美元。沈海滨如是说，此番雄心壮志让人对未来的太空旅行充满期待。在一个天刚亮，阳光还未完全爬上地平线的早晨，四川凌空天行科技有限公司却已经忙碌不已。就在此时，一架被誉为云行的超音速飞机验证机在7时40分整，像极了一个被唤醒的巨兽，腾空而起，冲向苍穹。IT 之家记者兴奋地报道，这次试飞不仅是为了考核飞机的气动性能、防热技术以及控制系统，更是对超音速飞行的未来敲开了大门。根据官方介绍，云行系列可以以4倍以上音速飞行，听上去就像是超级英雄出门遛弯的速度。这架飞机的设计灵感来源于高升阻比成波体气动布局。简单来说，就是在飞行高度增加时，空气的密度减小了，升力和阻力也随之变化，而这样的布局可以让飞机保持高效性能，仿佛是在空气中滑行的溜冰者，既经济又舒适。这不仅让飞行员们如履平地，也让地面上的工程师们拍手称快。当然，要在如此高的速度下飞行，并不是一件容易的事。飞机表面会持续受到气动加热，局部温度甚至会超过1000摄氏度。这可不是开玩笑的温度，简直可以烤个牛排了。然而，云行系列飞机的全复合材料结构像一个坚不可摧的盔甲，成功经受住了极限环境的考验。就连地面上的技术员都忍不住为他们的作品鼓掌欢呼。四川凌空天行还表示，11月将完成对筋斗云系列发动机的飞行验证，并计划在2027年实现超音速客机原型机的首飞。这个消息让人不禁想象，未来的旅行会不会像科幻电影一样，登上飞机，刚享用完机上丰盛的早餐，就已经到达目的地了。值得一提的是，小米也曾在2019年联合凌空天行发射过水平回收技术验证火箭天行 I1。这让人不禁感慨，这些科技公司不仅在智能手机领域斗智斗勇，还在太空争夺战中频频发力。而这家成立于2018年的四川凌空天行，其研发总部位于北京市亦庄经济技术开发区，动力研发中心则在陕西省西安市，而火箭研发生产基地则选址在安徽省蚌埠市。可以说，这家公司是将中国的大好河山都踏遍了，才研发出这么一架令人惊叹的超音速飞机。这样的步伐和宏伟计划，让我们对这家公司以及云行系列飞机的未来充满了期待和好奇。欢迎大家进入六度探索的辩论环节。我们从正反两个角度对本节目进行辩论，请出我们的辩论高手楚天舒、谢琪琪。
我是楚天舒。
我是谢琪琪。
这项技术的进步无疑是令人振奋的。中国公司成功测试高速飞行的云行原型机，展示了中国在航空航天技术上的显著进步。想想看，从北京到纽约只需2个小时，这无疑打破了时间和空间的界限。更重要的是，这种技术不只是为了炫耀，而是有实际应用价值的，比如全球商业航班和廉价的太空旅游，这些都是未来无限可能的领域。根据2019年全球航空业报告，全球航空业对 GDP 的贡献约为2.7万亿美元，进一步发展超音速航空将大幅提升这一数字。更快的旅行时间意味着更多的经济活动和跨文化交流，这无疑是对全球社会的巨大贡献。
哇哦，速度固然重要，但问题是，我们是否在追求速度的过程中忽视了安全和环境？ 历史上，协和式客机的失败部分就源于其高昂的运营成本和安全问题。协和式飞机在2000年的空难之后再也没有恢复过来。尽管云行吹嘘其速度和技术，但我们是否考虑了飞行过程中产生的噪音污染，尤其是当超音速飞行突破音障时产生的音爆？音爆不仅对人类健康有影响，也会对野生动物产生干扰。根据2018年发表在《环境科学与技术》上的研究，音爆对海洋哺乳动物的影响仍然是未解之谜。我们是否应该先解决这些潜在的问题，而不是一味追求速度？
你的担忧不无道理，但公司已经在应对这些挑战。首先，音爆问题是一个已知的挑战，许多研究正在进行以减少或消除其影响。例如 ，NASA 与多个航空公司合作，正在研究一种名为平静声音的技术，以降低音爆的影响。其次，在安全方面，中国公司已投入大量资源进行测试和验证，以确保其技术的可靠性。至于环保问题，与传统飞机相比，云行采用的高效能设计和轻质材料有望减少燃料消耗和碳排放。根据国际航空运输协会的数据，航空业的碳排放占全球总排放的2%，任何技术上的改进都有可能显著减少这一比例。因此，云行并不是盲目追求速度，而是追求一种可持续的未来航空解决方案。
虽然你提到的技术进步听起来很有希望，但我们不能被科技的光芒所蒙蔽。回顾历史，科技的进步常常伴随着无法预料的社会和环境问题。举例来说，汽车的发明带来了交通便利，但也导致了严重的空气和噪音污染。同样，互联网的普及带来了信息的快速传播，但也导致了隐私和信息安全的问题。超音速飞行虽然有可能减少旅行时间，但我们是否做好了迎接其社会影响的准备？例如，能否在机票价格上做到公平，而不是让这种旅行方式成为新的奢侈品，仅供富裕阶层享受？根据2022年全球不平等报告，科技进步往往加剧了财富不平等，我们是否应更关注其可能带来的社会分化？
你的观点很有深度，然而科技进步本身并不必然导致不平等，关键在于如何运用和普及这些技术。以手机为例，最初只是少数人才能拥有的奢侈品，如今已成为普及到每个角落的必需品。中国公司希望通过云行等项目打破超音速技术的垄断，让更多人享受科技便利。这不仅是科技的进步，也是社会进步的体现。同时，该公司明确表示，他们计划大幅降低太空旅游的票价，这表明他们正试图打破传统奢侈品的界限。此外，随着技术的发展，运营成本也有可能下降，这将促进票价的进一步下降。根据波音公司的预测，随着新技术的引入，2030年全球航空客运量将显著增加，这与超音速飞行的普及密切相关。
当然，我们都希望技术能够普惠大众，但现实往往比理想要复杂得多。即便是手机这样的科技产品，尽管价格已经下降，但根据2023年全球数字鸿沟报告，世界上仍有近30亿人没有完全享受数字技术带来的便利。这表明，即使价格降低，其他因素如基础设施建设、文化和教育水平也会影响技术的普及。更何况，超音速飞行需要的基础设施和技术支持远比一部手机复杂得多。我们不能只寄希望于价格的下降，还必须考虑到社会制度、政策和文化等多方面的因素。在此之前，也许我们更应该关注如何改善当前的航空技术，以便更广泛地提升全球交通的可及性，而不是在超音速飞行的梦幻泡影中迷失方向。
我是评委合理，我想对两位精彩的辩论做出评论。在楚天舒与谢琪琪的辩论中，两位辩手的观点各具特色，展现了对超音速飞行技术的不同理解与思考，值得深入探讨。楚天舒的立场显然是支持超音速飞行技术的发展，并强调其可能带来的经济利益与全球互联互通的潜力。他用数据支持自己的观点，并提到技术的进步可以为航空业带来可观的增长。然而，他的论述在安全性和环保问题上的考量似乎过于简化， 未能充分反映出科技进步可能带来的复杂社会影响，尤其是他对音爆问题的应对措施的信心，未能考虑到实际落实中的困难与不确定性。相比之下，谢奇奇则提出了有力的反对意见，指出了追求速度可能会忽视的安全性和环保问题。他以历史为鉴，提醒大家科技进步常常伴随着预料外的社会与环境挑战，并强调了技术普及的多重障碍。谢奇奇的观点深入，并提出了关于社会不平等的问题，这是楚天舒未能触及的层面。他强调了技术的发展必须考虑如何惠及每一个人，而不仅仅是富裕阶层。在辩论的过程中，楚天舒和谢奇奇的互动非常活跃，两者之间形成了良好的对比。尽管楚天舒试图通过数据和技术的进步来打消谢奇奇的担忧，但谢奇奇的质疑却揭示了技术与社会发展之间的深层次矛盾。最终，这场辩论不仅让我们反思超音速飞行的利弊，也提醒我们在科技进步的同时，必须相应的关注安全、环保以及社会公平等多重因素。总结来说，这场辩论成功地凸显了科技进步的两面性，无论是楚天舒对于未来的乐观展望，还是谢奇奇对现实挑战的警醒，都为观众提供了深刻的启示。未来的科技发展应该在促进效率与保护环境之间找到一个平衡点，才能真正造福整个社会。
大家好，欢迎来到我们的华尔街争议节目。今天我们将聚焦一位曾经的商界巨头周正毅，他的最新动向引起了广泛的热议。在出狱后，这位曾被福布斯评选为上海首富的商业大佬，如今却选择与网红于文宏合作，进入直播带货的行列，推广新疆农产品。网友们不禁议论，这位昔日的商界风云人物，为了生计不惜放下身段，竟然甘愿下海。周正毅在直播过程中还不忘与于文宏打情骂俏，让不少观众惊讶不已，甚至有人批评他为了带货竟然如此低调。而在社交媒体上，网友们对他的变心言论也不断，甚至对其前妻毛玉萍发起举报，这背后又隐藏着什么样的商业与情感纠葛？周正毅的过去充满争议，他曾是香港上市公司的主席，却因涉入金融犯罪被判刑，直到2020年才获释。而如今，他的行为无疑给人们带来了许多思考。昔日的贵族商界，如今竟然也在电商浪潮中挣扎求存。这一切究竟是商业智慧的转型，还是另有隐情？请大家继续收看详细内容。周正毅曾经是商界风云人物，2002年被福布斯评为上海首富。然而，在历经金融犯罪风波，并因行贿等罪名被判刑16年后，他于2020年出狱。在一片哗然与好奇中，这位曾经高调的上海地产巨头，如今选择了一条截然不同的道路。据星岛日报报道，周正毅最近与网红于文宏合作，在直播间推销新疆农产品，以助农名义进行带货活动。这样的变化让不少网民感慨，这位商界大佬如今也走进了流行的电商营销领域，甚至不惜放下身段，以引起更多的关注。周正毅的现身直播间引发了网民的热议。他将头发染成金色，以一副新潮形象出现在直播中，并在镜头前与于文宏进行幽默对话。周正毅笑称，很多人问起会长于文宏那么凶，你为什么能和会长成为朋友？我说不但成朋友，可能还有另外一种朋友，大家都有这种机会，因为会长单身吗？我也单身对吗？这种打情骂俏的语气，不少网民评价他为了带货也是煞费苦心，甚至用上了语带双关的幽默。网民的评论也是褒贬不一。有些人赞赏周正毅的勇气，认为他能够放下过去的光环，积极参与时下流行的直播行业，是一种时代的转变和适应。也有不少网民涌入周正毅的前妻毛玉萍的社交平台，打趣举报周正毅变心。 毛玉萍同样也投入了直播带货的行列，她与周正毅的先后转型，让人不禁感慨，曾经的上海贵族也在这个快节奏的互联网时代中找寻新出路。周正毅在走向直播间之前，已经在自己的抖音账号上分享影片，介绍自己多次前往新疆，与于文宏及当地果业界开会，商讨助农新疆的合作可能性。事实上，他不仅仅局限于农产品的推广，对于旅游、文化等领域的生意也表现出浓厚兴趣。这样的多元化尝试，似乎在向外界表明，周正毅依然是一位不甘于沉寂的创业者。对于于文宏这位具有鲜明个性的网红，他的背景同样充满话题性。据了解，他自称曾5次结婚、4次离婚，而他在直播中的争议性表现，甚至曾导致他的账号被封禁。他以整容和医学美容生意闻名，宣称我的脸就是我们企业的信用。他的这种独特风格吸引了一大批粉丝，也为他与周正毅的合作增添了更多看点。在这场直播带货的现实戏剧中，周正毅和于文宏的合作既是一次商业实验，也是一场充满娱乐性的社会现象。对于周正毅而言，这不仅是一次重返商界的尝试，更是他对自己过去人生的一次重新定义。无论最终结果如何，这位曾经的上海首富再次吸引了社会的目光，并在时代的变迁中探索出属于自己的新道路。在直播间，我们通常会看到年轻的网红们卖力的推销产品，但这一次，一位曾经的上海商界巨头63岁的周正毅竟然也现身其中。周正毅这个名字在中国经济史上可是响当当的。作为前上海首富，他的出现让人不禁怀疑，难道这位前富豪竟沦为直播带货了？周正毅染着一头酷炫的金发，站在女网红于文宏的抖音直播间侃侃而谈。他不光卖新疆的农产品，还不忘自我调侃一番。很多人问起会长于文宏那么凶，你为什么能和会长成为朋友？我说不但成朋友，可能还有另外一种朋友，因为会长单身吗？我也单身，对吗？这句话让直播间的观众笑成一片，不知道是为产品还是为这段暧昧的对话。有人说，曾经的商界大佬为了带货不得不下流，也有人欣赏他放下身段，与时俱进的参与电商营销。看着周正毅在直播镜头前嬉笑着卖东西，网友们各有各的看法，是商界霸主的落寞，还是进军新领域的开始？如果时光倒流到1961年，谁能想到这个出生于上海市杨浦区贫困之家的男孩，17岁就离家打工，后来在1978年开了家小馄饨店，起步成为个体户小老板。他的商界传奇从1989年与妻子毛玉萍合作开设的阿毛炖品开始。命运的齿轮在1997年亚洲金融风暴期间扭转，他和妻子买下了李嘉诚旗下的蓝筹股，一举捞到人生的几亿港币，购买了多家上海楼宇。到了2000年，周正毅的商业帝国已经壮大到拥有4家上市公司，2002年更是名列福布斯中国富豪榜第11名。他的成功故事被无数人传颂，成为了那一代创业者的梦想和榜样。然而，幸福总是短暂的。2003年9月，周正毅因涉嫌虚报注册资本罪和操纵证券交易价格被捕，直到2020年才重获自由。出狱后的周正毅并没有选择隐退，而是转战抖音平台拍摄短视频，分享他的新生活。或许对他来说，过去的成败已成云烟，重要的是把握当下。他曾在视频中提到自己去新疆与于文宏及当地果业界开会，商讨助农新疆事宜。这一次直播带货显然是他计划的一部分。周正毅的故事不仅在于他的辉煌过去，更在于他出狱后如何重塑自我。在新疆的田野里，他不仅在思考如何帮助当地农民，也在为自己寻找新的方向。通过抖音与于文宏的合作，他用一种全新的方式再次出现在公众面前。如今，周正毅化身为直播带货的新星，在网络上抛头露面，参与时下最流行的电商营销。他的出现既是商界大佬的落寞，也是时代变迁的缩影。正如网友们所调侃的，他不再是那个高高在上的上海首富，而是一个接地气的带货达人。将过去的荣耀抛在脑后，他在直播间里散发着别样的光芒。对于周正毅来说，或许这趟旅程就像一次重生，不管是成为直播界的新秀，还是继续在新疆的农田间忙碌，他的故事仍在继续，未完待续。 而对于我们这些围观者来说，看着他在镜头前的表演，不禁感叹，有些人即便命运跌宕，依然不减风采。他不仅是上个时代的产物，更是新时代的开拓者。欢迎大家进入六度探索的辩论环节。我们从正反两个角度对本节目进行辩论，请出我们的辩论高手楚天舒、谢琪琪。
我是楚天舒。
我是谢琪琪。
周正毅这位前上海首富转战直播带货，实际上是商界精英对时代变化的敏锐反应。他的选择不仅是为了生计，更是一种营销策略的调整。从历史来看，无论是古代的商贾还是现代的企业家，顺应时代潮流总是成功的关键。周正毅通过直播平台推广新疆农产品，一方面帮助当地经济，另一方面也能重塑个人品牌。根据艾瑞咨询的一项调查显示，2019年中国直播电商市场规模已达到4338亿元，预计未来几年将继续增长，这正是周正毅所抓住的市场机遇。这样的举动无可厚非，反而值得钦佩，毕竟在全球化和数字化的时代，商界大佬们都在不断调整策略，以求得生存和发展。
周正毅从商界大佬变身成直播带货主播，实在是一场悲喜剧。像他这样的风云人物，现在要通过打情骂俏引起关注，真是让人唏嘘不已。这不仅仅是时代的变化，而是对他早年行为的无奈收场。我们可以看到，周正毅的直播并不像李佳琦、薇娅那样专业，而是带有明显的炒作成分，这反映出他的急功近利。根据福布斯数据，一般公众人物试图通过直播年收入过千万，但许多人最终只是昙花一现，并未成功。而周正毅这样迅速转型的人，很可能只是为了炒热度，并不具备真正的电商运营能力，注定难以长久。这让人不禁怀疑，他这样的选择是否真能带来可持续的发展，还是只是一种短视的商业操作。
周正毅的选择并不是短视，而是适应现代商业环境的明智之举。以往他因金融罪行而失去自由，而现在通过合法途径重新崛起，这本身就是值得赞扬的转变。纵观历史，许多成功的企业家都曾遭遇挫折，却从未放弃。在美国，前总统特朗普也是商界成功破产再崛起的典型代表。周正毅的做法无非是将自己的商界经验与现代营销手段结合，帮助地方经济。根据中国统计局的数据，2020年中国的农村电商交易额已达到 1.79 万亿元，这显示出农村电商市场的巨大潜力。周正毅在这一领域的投入，正是符合国家扶贫政策和市场发展趋势的选择。他不仅在重新找回自我价值，也在推动社会经济发展。
说周正毅是在崛起，未免过于乐观。首先，他曾是上海首富，如今却沦为直播带货，这其中的落差难以掩饰。而且他的做法并不是真正在推动地方经济，而是利用个人影响力获取关注。根据普华永道的研究报告，数字化转型并不只是开个网络渠道，而是需要综合的战略规划和执行能力。周正毅缺乏这样的能力，而只是借助他与俞文洪的绯闻吸引眼球，利用个人生活炒作已经成为他现阶段的策略，这其实并不长久。我们应该关注的是，一个曾经的商界传奇人物，如何才能在道德和商业之间找到平衡，而不是单靠交际手段来维持短期的商业利益，这种方式只会加剧他的公众形象崩塌。
然而，周正毅的直播活动并不仅仅是简单的带货，而是包含了他对未来商业模式的探索。在当今的数字化时代，商界领袖们都在试图通过创新手段重新定义品牌和市场策略。周正毅的直播可以看作是他对市场潮流的敏锐感知和快速应对。根据麦肯锡的一份报告显示，未来商业的增长将主要依赖于数字化转型和创新服务，这正是周正在尝试的方向。即便他的手法看似有些娱乐化，但这正是吸引现代消费者的有效手段。以往传统的商业手段已无法适应互联网时代瞬息万变的市场需求，因此无论对于企业还是个人品牌，这种创新尝试都是值得鼓励的。
创新当然重要，但不应以牺牲个人形象和商业伦理为代价。 周正毅的尝试确实是一种创新，但他的手段显然有所偏颇。回顾历史，许多企业家在创新过程中也曾走过歧途，如安然公司在财务报表上的不当操作，最终导致其破产。周正毅的问题在于，他的所作所为更像是一场精心包装的炒作，而非真正的商业创新。根据哈佛商学院的研究，成功的商业转型需要建立在深厚的信任和透明度之上。周正毅的过往经历已经使他的公众信任度大打折扣，他的直播策略如果持续依赖于炒作和绯闻，只会进一步损害他在公众心中的形象，终将事倍功半。因此，真正的创新应回归本质，以诚信和社会价值为导向，而不是仅仅为了吸引眼球。
我是评委合理，我想对两位精彩的辩论做出评论。楚天舒和谢琪琪都从各自的立场出发，展现了对周正毅转型的不同看法，辩论的内容引人深思。楚天舒的观点强调周正毅的直播带货是一种商业智慧的体现，认为这是他顺应时代潮流的明智选择。他提到许多成功企业家的转型案例，并指出周正毅通过直播推广新疆农产品，既帮助了地方经济，也在重塑个人品牌。这些论据显然是基于市场数据和历史案例，展现了对商业环境的理解。然而，楚天舒的观点似乎忽视了周正毅这一转型的道德色彩和可持续性，过于乐观地看待其对未来的影响。相对而言，谢琪琪的批评更具刺痛力。他指出周正毅从商界精英沦落到直播主播的落差，质疑其专业性和道德标准。他强调周正毅的成功与否并不仅取决于市场趋势，还包括他在转型过程中是否能建立信任和透明度。谢琪琪对周正毅直播策略的怀疑，提醒我们商业行为不应只追求短期利益，而应关注其长远的社会责任。整体而言，楚天舒侧重于市场机遇的把握，而谢琪琪则强调商业道德的重要性。两者之间的对立反映出在现代商业环境中，一方面需要快速适应市场变化，一方面又不可忽视企业家的道德责任。周正毅的案例让我们看到，在数字化和全球化的浪潮中，商业创新必须与诚信和社会价值相结合，否则即使拥有再多的商业头脑，也难以赢得长期的成功与信任。最后，我认为这场辩论不仅是对周正毅个人行为的分析，更是对当代企业家在快变的环境中如何平衡商业利益与社会责任的深刻反思。楚天舒和谢琪琪的辩论都提供了宝贵的思考角度，值得我们深思与借鉴。您好，我是张天舒，在读书子栏目为您朗读各种名著，欢迎订阅我们的频道。谢谢您的支持，我们将更努力为您朗读好书。今天我为大家朗读的是进出新加坡监狱及近年来在中国的异端并附体悟常识。本书是作者7年前出版的自传，进出中组部，简称前者，续篇，分上卷、下卷及附录3部分。本视频包含该书章节。第4章，新加坡领袖聘请我。继续来说，4.2里光耀让我到海峡时报。后半部分。2. 中国时局分析。对中国大陆时局的分析预测是我专栏文章的重点，占总篇数的一半，可分为以下几类。1. 会议评论。春天的人大政协，秋天的中共中央全会是中国政治生活的重头戏。6中全会与精神文明，预测全会关于精神文明决议的重要性和局限性，说笔者再次强调制度文明，例如肃贪反腐必须，健全人事制度不能贪，严厉制裁法律不敢贪，忠心养廉不必贪，强化职业道德不愿贪。前3项属于制度文明，只有最后一项是精神文明。 可惜中共还未认识制度文明。中共15大，中国今年最重大事件，邓时代终结与将时代开启称，邓小平已经没有能力主导下半年的15大，无论届时他在世与否。15大都将是20年来第一个没有邓小平本人及其影子的党代会，它将是邓时代的终结。此文发表4天后邓去世，同事戏称被我咒的。15大的预测和分析一文中，我对于会议的召开时间、筹备工作、高层变动进行分析预测。香港《信报》又将此文翻译成中文转载。2. 领袖褒贬，先后有李瑞环，最年轻的第3代领袖；李鹏为加强地位出席亚欧会议；张万年，最高军事将领；胡锦涛和第4代领袖；江泽民在邓后仍将掌权。元老作用的回顾与展望，江泽民已拥有不可动摇的地位。彭真，资格最老，一生坎坷，晚年失意。中国领袖排行榜，中国的元老的演变，已故领袖子女今安在等。邓小平逝世前后议事。1997年之前，邓在各国媒体上已死数次。1996年底写好对邓的盖棺论定已被不实之虚。1997年2月19日晚10时，宋克荒在北京中南海家中电话我，大老板走了，海里封港，你听外面的汽车声音。我急电冯总，邓已亡。消息准确，中国不会匿藏不报，今夜肯定公布，快准备稿件，明日见报。11时，中国科技部叶局长也电告。20日20时45分，新华社公布邓亡消息。当日我的邓小平盖棺未定论的政治家一整版刊出。邓小平追悼会次日，时报以整版刊登我的简朴后事，客观评价真挚情感，评论治丧活动的文章。3. 年度预测和总结。1995江泽民权力巩固之年，1996讲政治，论统一，保稳定等。中国1996经济健康，外交顺利，政治稳定。说政治加强控制而持续稳定，强力镇压异议分子。报童刑满仍被软禁，王丹和刘晓波再次入狱。托克维尔说，一个坏政府最危险是他企图变好事。中国现在没有变好，近期也无此企图，因此他既没近忧，又无远虑。这就是王岐山近年推荐的就制度与大革命的主要论点。此文刊登在星期日版的第1、2两个整版上，首版套红，特大号字体的通栏标题。冯总说，周日版是销售量最多、影响最大的，李光耀已同意，您今后重要文章都刊登在这里。4. 民族及军队。西藏，中国的另一块心病；新疆，危险的信号，崭新的难题。民族分裂与恐怖主义结合，谁掌握枪？中国军队与党的关系，中央军委与中国军队被香港《信报》译成中文转载。我的失误。1. 中共恢复党主席制度的益处。15大改总书记为主席制的消息频传，我认为若恢复党主席制有益处，有可能。2. 15大的预测和分析。盛传常委可能增为9人，我认为有可能，实为误判。16大常委才变成9人，后来被朋友挖苦，你5年早知道。3. 新世纪我重返美国，冯总仍经常咨询我。我认为16大江泽民全退，结果他留任军委主席，我栽了。3. 对中国的批评。中国政府 vs 魏京生，为什么？怎么办？1995年12月，中国重判魏京生14年。我要求发声，冯总婉转反对。我坚持，刚来报社40天，就遇到民主运动标志性人物再次被重判事件。我这次沉默，今后就失去发言权。若李光耀怪罪，你说劝阻无效，我从此金盆洗手，改正归邪。冯总骨子里是自由主义者，放心。这是我能回中国后首次公开反华。 在新加坡公开干涉中国内政的首次，也可能是末次，要把话说够。我以故事开头，又是被告知左邻单身女子乱搞恋爱要干涉，又涉父母打孩子，人家内务不能管。成年方明白，青年恋爱个人隐私，无权干涉，打孩子犯法，家庭暴力人皆该管。中间4000字分析杀猴警惕的目的，最后预测人质外交的释放形式，王军涛模式，保外就医直飞美国。中国肯定经过讨价还价，在最有利的时机，以最有利的价格把魏京生卖给美国。果不其然，1997年底克林顿总统访华前，魏京生保外就医，直接流放美国。文章当然还要以故事结束，过去看古装戏，官兵捉不到义士，抓其亲属，破其旧犯。现在看警匪片，匪徒被困，以自己妻儿亲属为人质，逼警察放行。人心不古，世道真变了。此文发表在年底，1996年的新年在喜忧参半中度过。朋友赞赏新加坡官媒为民运人士喊冤，反对中国政府，头一遭好。联合早报中国同行羡慕，也就英文报纸自由度大，俺们中文的屁都不敢放一个。有哥们担忧，可别砸了饭碗。我不至于，最严重是今后不许踩雷。嘴上硬，心里颤，将来若是带着枷锁跳舞，就不好玩了。节后平安无事，虚惊一场。此后放开手脚，甩开臂膀，尽情放言。以下都是我自己的选题。北京重判王丹的利弊得失，我的强烈不满已在去年重判魏京生时表达，重话轻话，讽刺挖苦用尽，夫复何言？但是在新加坡的中国知识分子不能沉默，遂急书短文。当天评论版已经整版排上我谈西藏的文章，而我希望在王丹被判刑的次日，我的抗议声音能发出。结果只能在东亚版用半个版刊登此文。于是竟迫里同一天，同一份报纸发表同一作者的不同文章。文革30年，中国为什么鸦雀无声？天安门风云人物今安在？中国为什么管制经济信息？中国监禁国际货币组织雇员背后的故事，抗议中国逮捕 IFM 雇员弘扬的事件。4. 我感兴趣的自选专题：中国政坛的清华帮，针对大清王朝北大荒，清华高官占据要津。分析为什么清华高官多。1. 入校工科学生起点高。2. 重视基础教育，毕业适应性强，学生干部具领导能力。3. 分配基层，成长较快。70年代，胡锦涛、吴邦国、黄菊仪处级。4. 文革后，重视年轻化知识化，清华学子大量迅速高升。胡、吴、黄80年代初局级，80年代中省部级，90年代初成为中央领导。我预测2002年胡锦涛总书记，吴、黄政治局常委。清华毕业的第4代领导还将有统战部副部长刘延东，习近平37岁任福州市委书记，最年轻的省会书记。我的预测又都蒙对了，唯一没猜准的是习能任总书记。局限在农村的民主选举。结论：在坚持一党领导、禁止反对党存在的中国，乡村的民主选举不可能蔓延到城市，更不是民主政治的新曙光。评留学美国一书，1996年，中国可以说部出版，冯总希望我评之。我说不愿参加民族主义大合唱，批判也是抬举他，我不屑。若不是李光耀指示，不评也罢。我倒想夸奖副总理钱其琛之子钱宁所著《留学美国》，此文又被刊登在星期日版的第1、2两个整版上，首版彩色特大号字体的标题。2周前我对1996年回顾的文章也是同等待遇，半个月内一个人能2次获此殊荣，冯总说在《海峡时报》150年的历史上实属罕见。 文章发表反响巨大。冯总告我，李光耀见你文，也对前书感兴趣。李光耀后来在回忆录说，这是一本坦率直言的书，充分反映了年轻一代的观点。我为时报贡献了材质，冯总待我更好。报社雇员分10级，1-5为普通级，减习期1年，以上为执行级，减习期半年。我初被定为5级，职称分析员，工资比东亚所高1半。1995年底，冯总，您来3个月完全适应英文媒体工作，明年转正定为7级。我才9级。我新名片变成高级分析员，工资是东亚所的2倍。1996年底考核，冯总说，我对您的评价非常高，等级是少有的异常优秀，年终奖也是全报社最高的，6个月，1级相当于6个月工资。董事会才给我3个月，但是我却有愧于冯总和时报。1997年5月，如前文引子所述，我被以间谍罪名逮捕，离开海峡时报。但出狱后，冯总仍待我如朋友，欲聘任我任时报驻华高级顾问。感谢各位的关注，敬请期待下一期。该书第5章，获新加坡情报送中国。
The core question I seek to ask in this book, and why I embarked upon the academic research in the first place, is this. There's a body of literature now on how Xi Jinping has changed China, both its politics, its economy, its foreign policy, its security policy. The question, however, I found myself being asked most around the world is not how he was changing China, but why. What was the underpinnings of this significant, and I would argue radical change of course that we've seen in the last 12 years on the construction of Chinese politics, where they've taken the economy and where they've taken China's external engagement. And so the first point that I argue in this book is that in the Chinese Communist Party, in its 100-year history, ideology, Marxism-Leninism, matters. It has always mattered, even during the period of Deng Xiaoping and reform and opening, and the 35 years from the third plenum of the 11th Central Committee in 1978 through to Xi Jinping getting the main job in 2012. Ideology still mattered, albeit to define a framework which was less ideological than that which preceded it. It still had to be done formally. And certainly, when we approach the enormous body of work which Xi Jinping and those underneath him have contributed to in evolving that which is called Xi Jinping thought on socialism, the Chinese characteristics in the new era, to give its full rendition, is that this matters as well in providing for the party what others have described as a band of meaning within which policy and behavioural change then occurs. In other words, it becomes, in the history of the party, under Mao, under Deng, and now under Xi, a set of organising principles which establish the permissible limits for dialogue, discourse, debate and policy direction. In other words, ideology in the Chinese system has always been a leading indicator of change. And therefore, that's why folks like me take it seriously. And therefore, that's why I sought to fill what I saw as something of a gap in the debate on contemporary Chinese politics and foreign policy, a gap which existed on the actual content of Xi Jinping's ideological change. Second set of remarks I'd like to make here, simply by way of summary in terms of the ideological changes that you can deduce if you study carefully the Xi Jinping canon. I summarise them in 3 parts, and those of you who've seen my summary work will know what I'm referring to. I have said that from the get-go in 2012-13, Xi Jinping deliberately undertook to move Chinese politics to the Leninist left, by which I mean a reassertion of the centrality and paramount status of the party in and overall within the country, including the paramount status of the leader of the party within the party. Some would say that's not just Leninist, that's also Stalinist. I'll leave that to the Sovietologists to resolve among themselves. You can have a fight in the back corner later on. But this deliberate, from the get-go, reassertion of the absolute centrality of the party. Those of you who know the language well will know that Xi Jinping's aphorism taken from Mao, quote, "It doesn't matter whether we are north, south, east or west, whether we are talking about government, whether we're talking about commerce, whether we're talking about the academy, whether we're talking about society. The party leads in all," unquote. That is an unambiguous statement, and certainly that has been the case. What the book then does is seek to describe how the laying down of those aphorisms about the centrality of this Leninist ideological worldview then are translated into a series of measures in real-world politics in China in the period from 2012-2013 onwards. One by one, not just the anti-corruption campaign to restore ideological rigour and political purity to the ranks of the party, but in terms of the disciplinary regime imposed around what was permissible in terms of internal party debate. A new disciplined regime in terms of what was permissible in terms of debate within think tanks and the academy. A new set of disciplines in terms of what was permissible in terms of media discourse. In other words, a reassertion and an assertion of the centrality of a Leninist party and taking politics, therefore, to the Leninist left was not simply a series of abstractions out here in the metaphysical Marxist universe. It then is translated through into real policy and behavioural change in the Chinese system. The second element of ideological change, which I map in the book, is what I say and describe as Xi Jinping's decision to take Chinese ideology to the Marxist left. And I define this in terms of a more complex debate, which really did not reach its maturation until about 5 years into Xi Jinping's rule at the 19th Party Congress in 2017. And if I can step back from it for a minute, it's a bit like these lines. Mao Zedong described the Chinese Communist Party's central challenge, central task, or to use the Chinese phrase, its central contradiction, a Marxist phrase, as class struggle at home and abroad. And if you look at the architecture of Mao's policy and strategy in the period post-49, class struggle at home, combating imperialism abroad, the military engagement in Korea, support for the Vietnamese Revolution, these things actually translated through into the real world as well. Of course, there came a point by the mid-1950s when the party said at the 8th Party Congress in 1956, well, we've been doing this stuff for a while. We've got the Americans under control at 38th parallel. We've collectivized agriculture. We've nationalized industry. We've conducted serious class struggle and eliminated the landlord class and the capitalist comprador class. Surely it's time now to flip the dial in terms of the party's central ideological challenge towards unleashing the factors of production, not simply being preoccupied with what Marxists call the relations of production, which is a euphemism for class. And sure enough, at the 8th Party Congress in 1956, they resolved that. And Deng Xiaoping, who comes into the scene much later on again, is already by that stage Vice Premier of the State Council in charge of the economy, begins heading in this direction, until such time, of course, as Mao reacts and says, this is going too far. And then you see the anti-rightist movement of 1958. You see the Great Leap Forward and the accelerated collectivization of agricultural industry in that period, resulting in untold catastrophes for the country at large. And despite the reaction to that at the Lushan plenum in the early 60s, Mao's further counterattack against this attempt to revise the central ideological challenge of the party with the Cultural Revolution and the mass mayhem which it unleashed. In other words, by the time you get to the end of the Mao period, you have had this series, this wave of attacks from, let's call it, the political and ideological left of the party against those seeking to redefine the central challenge of the modern Chinese Communist Party from 1956 onwards as growing the economy, lifting people out of poverty, and therefore raising people's living standards, which he saw as the primary challenge of socialism. Deng Xiaoping, in his second historical resolution of 1981, summarized it in these terms. He said, we still are in what he described as the primitive stage or the primary stage of socialism. And in the primary stage of socialism, we cannot therefore overly accelerate these policy tools of collectivization of agriculture and industry to the point of ultimately extinguishing any form of private incentive and profit motive. And so by this artful ideological device of characterizing where China stood in the post-81 period as still being in the primary stage of socialism, he was able ideologically to justify the introduction of pro-market mechanisms into the economy and incentives for both farmers and then for those engaged in small-scale light industrial enterprises and then those engaged across the totality of the economy. Roll the clock along then to 2017, 35 years later. What does Xi Jinping do in the 19th Party Congress in his report? He formally redefines again for the first time in 35 years the party's central challenge, the central task, again, its central contradiction, the 主要的矛盾. And he says, these 35 years have been pretty interesting, but we've now seen emerge a whole series of imbalances in China's development, becoming code language for corruption in the party, code language for the relegation of the whole quest for equality within the country, as well as the relegation of the party itself. And so Xi Jinping, in the 19th Party Congress report, then comes out and says, therefore we're entering into a new era, the third era in China's revolutionary history, the first being Mao, the second being Deng, the third now being myself, Xi Jinping. And I will use this new era to rectify the imbalances from the past. That becomes code language in turn for a series of political interventions in the real world economy, again in real world politics, but beyond that in terms of China's engagement with the outside world as well. And so the argument that I put in the book is that this evolving ideological narrative from the Mao period through the Deng period into the Xi period, and in this Xi period you see as a consequence of the ideological change and moving to the Marxist left on the economy, a deliberate re-emphasis on the role of state-owned enterprises vis-a-vis the private sector, a reinvestment into the absolute centrality of an empowered industrial policy, reinforced by large-scale industrial funds, which are gargantuan in size, versus the free operation of the market, and a re-emphasis or emphasis for the first time since 1981 of the common prosperity doctrine in terms of wealth redistribution. So my overall thesis is that ideological change, changing the definition of the party's central contradiction, and moving the dial away from untrammeled reform and opening to now activist interventions in the economy, have in fact resulted in a series of concrete economic policy measures which flow from this ideological shift which we saw documented in 2017. So it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the dual circulation economy, doesn't matter whether we're talking about other elements of formal economic policy exposition under Xi Jinping, the subsequent party central economic work conferences and central financial work conferences take their lead from what happened in 2017, reinforcing my thesis that ideology matters. The change in the terms of the headwaters of the ideological debate then flow through to what we then see in the real world of the economy. So when people say today, I wonder why the economy is not performing well, and why don't they just fix it? people need to reflect on the deep ideological decisions taken in 2017 as to why Xi Jinping saw that there was a better and alternative course of action to preserve the party's power in the economy, to preserve the power of the state in relation to the private sector, and to engineer a more equal set of economic outcomes than were otherwise being prosecuted through a period of untrammeled reform and opening. I'll finish on this. The third element of ideological change, which I map in the book, is somewhat more controversial. I call it Xi Jinping's decision to move China's ideological agenda towards the nationalist right. That is, moving Leninism to the left, moving the economy to the Marxist left, and moving foreign security policy towards the nationalist right. And you see this redolent in his literature again from 2012-13 on, about a decision on his part that, given the fact that China's comprehensive national power had become much greater in the intervening 35 years, that the time had come, therefore, to much more vigorously, actively assert China's interests and values in the region and the world, and in relation to the United States. We saw this, of course, writ large, most spectacularly in the 2014 Central Foreign Affairs Work Conference, which for the first time began speaking of, and I was struck by this at the time, 10 years ago. I remember watching this on television in Beijing late into the evening one night when you're seriously entertainment deprived. You're watching Central Chinese Television 1, and there aren't even any decent ads. And sure enough, there was the rendition of China now being engaged in a struggle for the future of the international system. And this was a phrase which hit me between the eyeballs, because Deng Xiaoping's previous axiom had been, hide your strength, bide your time, never take the lead. But underneath it all was a decision which said China, for its reform policy to succeed domestically and unleashing the factors of production and growing the economy and raising people's living standards, was that this would only be turbocharged by a massive drive for Chinese exports into the world, and therefore accepting the broad terms established for the international economic order as led by the United States. That orthodoxy, parallel to Deng's domestic agenda, which I described before, was again in 2014 turned on its head by Xi Jinping in a deliberate and active ideological move. And since that Central Foreign Affairs Work Conference, the first of 3 such conferences in the last 10 years, we see, therefore, a more assertive and vigorous Chinese foreign and security policy in the region and the world. Wolf warriors may have come and gone, but the underlying assertion of China's power, influence, position, and determination to secure its territorial interests in disputed territorial questions in East Asia and the West Pacific and on the Sino-Indian border are now much clearer, defined than they've ever been before, together with the active and accelerated expansion of the Chinese military in a new and more assertive form of China's exercising and interdiction of foreign military forces deemed to be in Chinese sovereign territory at any given time. So therefore, these are the 3 sets of interrelated ideological changes which I seek to map in the book. I've spoken for long enough now, but I'm sure with Jude we can then pursue, as he's indicated to me he would like to pursue. Okay, Kevin, that's terrific. If you think ideology has been a useful, but not exclusive, predictor of where Chinese politics and the economy and foreign security policy have gone in the last 10 years, so therefore, physician, heal thyself and tell us where it will go for the next 10 years. And so with that entree and with some fear and trepidation, I yield myself to cross-examination by Jude Blanchette, Senior Counsel. Thank you very much.
Well, please answer the first question that you've. First of all, thank you, Ambassador Rugg, for your time, and also a huge note of congratulations for writing this wonderful, stimulating book. Time is short, and I know I want to keep enough time for folks to ask questions here, so just a few from me. And actually, maybe also for the audience, one of the most unique things about the vantage point you bring to this, aside from the formal academic study, is you've been able to see Xi Jinping with a number of different hats that I think, unless there's any other former prime ministers, foreign ministers in here, I think you might be the only one who could both bring an intellectual and scholarly angle, reading the documents, weighing through the text, but also a more tactile understanding of Xi Jinping as leader of a country, grand strategist, also a bureaucrat, and also a politician, someone who needs to keep and hold together coalitions. So I wonder if I could, just as an initial question, ask you to explain your, how do you think about Xi Jinping with those various hats? Let's say national leader, let's say a politician, and let's say grand strategist. What's your estimation of him across those three domains?
I think one of the reasons why I don't entitle this book or describe it as a biography is because I'm very bad at psychology, which is, and having been a political leader myself, the idea of me interpreting why another political leader is doing X because of where he or she grew up, how many times they were bashed up in the playground at school, etc., etc. I'm kind of not into that stuff because I think it's largely unknowable, frankly, unless you're Freud, unless you're Jung, or unless you're Freud or Jung's counselor. So that's not kind of my shtick. So therefore, I put that to one side. Mine is a more limited aspiration here. Mind you, there are good efforts at biographies of Xi Jinping that are out there, including one by Liz Economy. Mine is to intellectual biography overstated, ideological biography is more to the point, which is why have they assembled this body of works, this canon of Xi Jinping's ideological thinking in the way in which the system is done and which he plainly has authorized. And what meaning, what band of meaning is he seeking to project to the 100 million members of the Communist Party in terms of the way forward? That's what interests me. And that because, as I said before, it becomes a useful predictor of the future. In terms of personal reflections on the guy, I've been in a number of one-on-one meetings with him, and I've been in a number of small group meetings with him. What I've always said about Xi Jinping is that, and contrary to much of the internal criticism of him, is that within China itself, is that I've always seen Xi Jinping as very much wrapped in his own deep understanding of Chinese history and his understanding of international history. He is, I won't say history buff, that's not the right term, but he is immersed in the reading of his own country's history, classical and modern, as well as some reading and translation of world history as well. And so therefore, it's important for us to understand that because he brings to bear an historian's perspective, which is where he thinks and concludes China lies in the current period of time. So I think that is important for us to understand. The second thing I think is important for us to understand is that he sees himself, in my judgment, both from what I read about what he writes, but also in encounters with him over the years, is he sees himself as a man of history, that is, an actor in history, and not just a small actor in history, but a large actor in history. And therefore, it is important for us to understand that as well. The third element I throw into the equation, and why I wrote this book, was when we talk about being immersed in his own country's history and him seeing himself as an historical actor of significance, is he also sees himself as a Marxist-Leninist, and the Marxist-Leninism view of history. And if you look at the epistemological tools of Marxism-Leninism, historical materialism, dialectical materialism, it's often tough for American audiences and frankly broader Western audiences to get terribly excited by all this stuff. It just sounds so exotic. But my melancholy duty is to inform you is that if you read this stuff, the entire ideological canon of Xi Jinping is immersed in this stuff. Where China currently sits in the evolution of historical materialism, for example, and why its age is now, as it were, arriving, its time is arriving. And it's his approach to dialectical materialism, which is, of course, about the unity of opposites and how you are dealing with the contradictions or opposing forces mounted against you at home and abroad at a given time. He sees himself as an active period of struggle, as we've all seen in his speech-making over time. So the reason I say these things, it's not just, a classical Chinese view of history in terms of historical cycles, etc. Nor is it simply a person who sees himself as an active figure in history like Qianlong or Kangxi. He is an active ideologue, and therefore this informs his framework about China's moment having arrived, conclusions of historical materialism, and where his principal points of struggle now lie, both at home and abroad. The United States and its allies, and frankly those seeking to oppose the politics of a more Marxist-Leninist state within the country.
One of the things Charlie mentioned in his introductory comments is the importance of reading this book, but thinking about this question for how we understand China's trajectory, including in a period after Xi goes to see Marx. I'm curious how you think about Xi Jinping thought as either the distillation of one singularly powerful leader's view of the world and what China should do. How much of this is the product of a consensus within the senior-most elements of the system that is given the name of Xi Jinping thought, but actually has deeper roots? Or option three is, of course, all of the above. But I'm curious how you think about the interplay between this being a singular contribution of Xi Jinping and there's the chance that these ideas evaporate after his exit, or these have staying power because they speak to something deeper about the system.
Well, as you know, this is the much wider debate in the social sciences between agency and structure, and the agency of Xi Jinping's leadership versus the structure of the Chinese Communist Party and its underlying worldview. What I can map and have sought to map through this book is quite dramatic changes in the ideological frame and worldview of the current Communist Party since 2012. If I look at the way in which he articulates, explains, and then executes his notion of a Leninist party, it is vastly different to what we saw evolve in the post-78 period. Of course, with the big exception of what erupted in Tiananmen in 1989. Similarly, if I look at where he's taken the economy in terms of Marxist orthodoxy, or his definition of Marxist orthodoxy, and our own engagements with Chinese think tankers, we understand that this actually is pulling the system in a direction which is vastly different to where those who have been previous custodians of the orthodoxy on market reform and opening in the Chinese system would have taken it. And they've opposed it and failed. Similarly, in terms of the foreign policy establishment and the national security establishment, there are those who have argued internally that, in fact, Xi Jinping has gone too hard, too early, too definitively in relation to his assertion and confrontation with the United States and allies in Taiwan than was previously the wisdom under hide your strength, bide your time, never take the lead. So my argument on the agency versus structure thesis is as follows. These three are dramatic changes. Therefore, I reach a logical conclusion that the party consensus didn't simply sit around in a teepee and work out, having held hands for a while, that in fact the dialectic had truly moved on and that we have reached a new level of collective consciousness. He actually dragged the party into this direction, as Mao had done in previous periods as well. You don't see a whole lot of dissent about Mao's definition of class struggle during the Cultural Revolution. A, because a whole bunch of people had already been purged, and B, those who wanted to survive just kept putting their hand up at the relevant meetings. So my argument would be that the system, with some reluctance, has come with him, but he is the primary mover against the logic that I just ran through.
Final question, and then we'd like to open up to the audience, is I realize you've already indicated that you don't do pop psychology, but if I can press the issue one more time, is ask you to put yourself in the shoes of one of the tens of millions of cadres in the system who are reading Xi Jinping's most recent speech in Choushir magazine at a party study group.
Party secretary of the Shanghai No. 4 glue factory.
and trying to figure out, what do I do with this, right? I had a set of clear incentive structures 20 years ago, right? It was my locality, grow, smother over the side effects so that way they don't affect my promotion. Now I'm in this liminal phase where, yes, the economy still matters, but I'm hearing these creeping discussions of security threats, and now I've got this layer of Xi Jinping thought that is coming at me fast and furious in a number of directions. What do you think this looks like in terms of translating the ideas that you've distilled here across this entire wide sweep of policy domains? Is this going to work? How does the system process this? And what does this mean for sort of policy making and state capacity in China?
I think it's a really good question, Jude, because it asks from the bottom up, from the ground up, how is ideology read? Given that this is the system imposing it from the top down and from the leader down. Number one is, my observation over a long period of time is that what's remarkable about the Chinese system is how the party, 100 million members, are trained in how to read ideological change and shift. As you know, at the party school, there are courses which are conducted in how to read the line in the Remin Rabat, the People's Daily. I should have attended one of those when I first went there as first secretary. It would have saved a lot of time. But the rest of us who are foreign barbarians usually discover through trial and error as to what the paragraph 4 in the beginning of the Ke paragraph means, which is but. So the level of literacy, including the number 2 cadre at the Shanghai No. 4 glue factory, in how to read this stuff is somewhat more sophisticated than we think. That's my first point. Number 2, what would they therefore deduce in terms of changes in the line? And following the luxian, the line, is, as you know, an important consideration for surviving in Chinese Communist Party politics. They would deduce the following. A, that we cannot engage in any activity which could result in us being accused of being corrupt. And part of the reassertion of the virtues and value of the Leninist Party is an anti-corruption campaign, which is now the longest rolling campaign in the party's history, now more than 10 years old. What does that mean in practice? It means that when I engage with the private sector to do X, Y, and Z and ABC, all the consumers of my glue at the No. 4 Shanghai glue factory, is that I have to be hugely mindful of not engaging in any activity which could result in an anonymous accusation against me. What does that induce? High levels of caution. High levels of caution becoming inertia. High levels of caution becoming inertia, and perhaps even worse. I think the second thing is, related to this, is, and you anticipated this in the question, Jude, which is so much of the reassertion of the role of the state in the economy is not just about delivering more Marxist economic outcomes in terms of equality and a more central role for the party. It's also preparation for the state against future national security crises for the country. If they did end up in a future Taiwan-related security crisis, for example, Xi Jinping's rejuvenation of the entire Maoist concept of zili gengsheng, self-reliance, is now a comprehensive national orthodoxy again, which is how do we therefore produce a China which will be resilient in the face of future national security challenges where our access to global markets is then blocked off. The subtext to all of the above is be suspicious increasingly of foreigners. And therefore, if you are at the party secretary at the No. 4 glue factory in Shanghai, and you would normally welcome co-investors in what you were doing from the International Society of Glue Manufacturers, headquartered in Milwaukee,
you will now be very mindful of the dangers being posed to yourself by being too close to foreign partners and foreign business operatives. Those are two examples. That is caution, bordering on inertia in terms of being accused of corrupt activity with your own domestic client base or provider base. And secondly, caution in terms of dealing with foreigners, certainly as co-investors and collaborators in a particular industry sector. I think that there are two ways in which it would be read, and if there's one further one, it is just that when in doubt, when the Chinese system is in doubt, lie flat, not in the classical Tang Ping sort of sense of be out there and don't go to work, but keep your head down. And that is not a recipe for winning an economic contest now, which is all about technological innovation, enterprise, and being at the sharpest edge. Those would be my answers to your question.
Let's open it up to two house rules. First is one question, not 2, 3, 4, 5, and the other one, this might be somewhat controversial, is they must actually be questions and not statements of opinion, although I deeply care what all of you think personally about all these issues. Just for time reasons, a brief question would be helpful. So right here, please. Microphone will come around.
Hi, Ambassador Rudd. I'm Lisa Hannett from Busan, Hamilton. I would like to ask if Xi Jinping's ideology has an end game, and is that end game to make the world safe for Marxist-Leninist systems, or to be the most important voice in international policy? And if so, is it derived from something like historical materialism or something else? Thanks.
I think it's a really important question that you raise, because it is a totalizing system of thought. You know, it's the secular equivalent of Roman Catholicism. I mean, I grew up as a Roman Catholic. Think about the Catholic Church, it's got an answer for everything, okay? You mightn't agree with all those answers, but it's got an answer for everything. A bit like the Chinese Communist Party, it's got an answer for everything. And so it's totalizing. It's totalizing in terms of its epistemology. It's totalizing in terms of its millenarian concept of you know, the end state, which is the evolution from slave society through feudal society, through capitalist society, through socialist society. The end state, of course, being communism. If you read Xi Jinping's speech on the 200th anniversary of Marx's birth in 2018, it is really eye-opening in terms of where he sees the long-term ideological destination of the country as lying. So that is his desired end state, and still with the Leninist party in place to guide the Chinese nation to that end state, post-socialism and into communism. Internationally, what I find fascinating is the following. There's a whole new debate emerging, which I cover in the very last chapters of the book, because it's quite recent, about Xi's notion of so-called second integration. What is the second integration? Sorry if this sounds all too nerdy, but he is saying, here is communism, and here is effectively, and they do tacitly acknowledge this, a foreign ideology. Marx and Lenin did not grow up in Shanghai, okay? They didn't even grow up in Hunan, okay? And Lenin was a Russian and Marx was a German. And so here we have a German ideology translated through a Bolshevik revolution and the Comintern into the Chinese system through the events of the 20s and the 30s. And so what's the Chinese system said in its own historiography is that we have sinified communism through Mao Zedong, and we've done so in particular ways. In particular, and the one example that is always pointed to is Mao Zedong's conclusion, contrary to Marxist-Leninist doctrine and dogma, that the revolution could begin and be concluded successfully in the countryside and not in the cities. This is the first integration of sinifying Marxism-Leninism. The second integration is happening now, according to the Xi Jinping literature and Xi Jinping thought literature. And that is taking where
socialism with Chinese characteristics is reached in this decade, and beginning to incorporate into it, wait for it, classical concepts, ideas and language from the Chinese classical tradition into, let's call it conventional Chinese Marxism-Leninism, in order to broaden its appeal within the country at large. That I find interesting, because it's saying we will further sinify Chinese Marxism-Leninism, but take this message to the broader masses beyond the party in a manner which is acceptable and digestible and believable. Then, this is my term I use in the book, because they haven't used this term yet, there is the very beginnings of the ideas of the third integration. They don't use that term. The third integration content would be using certain acceptable concepts in world culture and incorporating those into this evolving canon of socialism with Chinese characteristics to make it a much more appealing and acceptable ideology for the world at large. And that is just now being talked about within the party's ideological circles. It's a separate question, of course, whether any of this stuff actually will work or not. But if you look seriously at how China, for example, in its new pitch to the Global South, right across from the Belt and Road Initiative, Global Civilization Initiative, Global Development Initiative, Global Security Initiative, is seeking to, frankly, broaden the ideological appeal of a new form of Marxism-Leninism, dressed in much more comfortable clothes, then this, I think, provides a pointer in that direction.
Questions we're going to take. Why don't I take three just in the interest of time? We're right there, and then gentleman in the middle, and then right here in the front.
My name is Artem Gergun. I'm from Kennan Institute at Wilson Center. I'd like to ask a question about Russia. What is the view of modern Russia, which once back in 1980s already proclaimed reaching the advanced stage of socialism? And
what is the view of Putin's Russia in?
Russia already, as a Soviet Union, they already have proclaimed reaching the advanced stage of socialism back in the 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And what is the Xi Jinping's view of modern Russian elite? Because from that socialist point of view, they look like traitors who betrayed the original idea of the Leninist project. So what would be your comments on this topic? Thank you.
My name is Anupam Khanna. I used to be at the World Bank and lived in China at the same time in the first tour. We opened the office there. My question goes back to this agency structure issue. I've been talking to people here and in India, China friends. Their view is, some view is that the first 5 years up to this 2017, there was a general consensus. In fact, Xi Jinping was mandated and his selection was to move in this direction. And the question is whether the elders and even the party elites underestimated his ability and his mastery of the politics. They never thought he would be able to do it as effectively. And what have been the implications of that? Related to that is that's for the first two, Leninist Marxist shift, ideological change.
I've got to get a couple more questions,
Sure,
and that's a great question.
But the military, what the role of the military has been on the third one, that is a view that obviously concerns people in India and I think Philippines, for example.
And then right here in the front, with the conspicuous copy of Ambassador Rudd's book.
Thank you. Hi, Ambassador Rudd. I'm Blaze. I'm a Ramsay Scholar at Georgetown, studying Master of Foreign Service.
Are you Australian?
I am, yes.
Okay.
From Melbourne.
I've got a dulcet Australian accent.
Thank you.
It's pure Shakespearean English, in case you understand.
My question is, as you know, I'm studying Mearsheimer, Kissinger, Kevin Rudd. What are the students in China studying to understand great power politics?
So Xi's view of modern Russian elite, was Xi underestimated? And then you heard the last one.
The complex debate between Soviet communism and Chinese communism, I think from your question you're familiar with. Let's never forget that the Chinese system, really after the Sino-Soviet split in the late 50s, routinely referred to the Soviet Union as not just revisionist, but as representing the forces of Soviet social imperialism. This also became an ideological device used by Deng Xiaoping, even when Mao was still alive. Remember his address to the United Nations in 1974, where Deng Xiaoping, having to explain what had just happened with Nixon going to China, was forced to basically say the principal contradiction lies with these bloody Soviet revisionists who are out there doing terrible things in the world and to us, and the secondary contradiction are the capitalist imperialists in the United States. So how does the Chinese system view post-Soviet Russia from an ideological lens? I think their view is twofold, if I look carefully at Xi Jinping's language. One of this great sense of ideological remorse about the failure of the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 to continue. Secondly, remember his phrase, the world is now witnessing developments and changes not seen in 100 years. It was first articulated in 2017, making clear that in his view, China now had become the torchbearer for the new wave of changes which the Bolshevik Revolution had unleashed first off back in 1917. But I think his real-world view of where post-Soviet Russia now stands, within his overall view of, let's call it, comprehensive national power, the correlation of forces, and the overall trends of history, is that this alignment between Putin's Russia and Xi Jinping's China is advantageous against now the inversion of where the principal contradictions lie. The principal contradiction now lies with the United States and its allies in the world. And whatever historical contradictions exist with the Russians on the border no longer exist. That would have been my best attempt at answering your question. In terms of did they underestimate Xi, I think two answers to that. One is, on the economy, and I noticed your World Bank background, sir, I'm not sure from reading the documentary record that Xi Jinping had in fact a Marxist blueprint for the economy in his mind in 2012. He had a Leninist imprint in his mind about what to do with the party. And of course that ultimately intersects therefore with the economy as well. I also have a view that if you look at the intensification, and also we saw the 2013 so-called decision document of the third plenum of the 18th Central Committee, which was to take reform even further. And remember its seminal conclusion a decade or so ago was that the market would play then the central organising role in the allocation of resources in the Chinese economy. So we might say to ourselves, what happened? I have a theory about that. I cannot prove it, and it's called the China's domestic financial crisis of 2015. And the Chinese domestic financial crisis of 2015, which many of us have forgotten about, was massive. And there was a grave concern then about implosion of the Chinese financial system. My conclusion from that is that Xi Jinping turned to his market economists and said, do you guys really know what you're doing? Do you really have the levers of control in hand? Or do we need to double down in a much more statist, partyist direction in terms of central economic management? That then dovetailed with his pro-party view and his Leninist view, and what then was consummated in 2017 and the party's final resolution that its overall approach to economic strategy then had to change. I think there was this seminal event which caused him to conclude that the party's credibility could be at risk for its failure and inability to prevent and then effectively manage that financial crisis. The third question was?
What are students in China reading? If we're reading Mearsheimer, I'll question that, but we're reading Rudd, certainly. What are they reading?
I think in terms of their understanding of the Western intellectual debate, they're reading three sets of authors at the moment. One is Mearsheimer. As Mearsheimer constantly says, and I radically disagree with John on practically everything, and I've debated him publicly twice, once in Australia, the other time in New York. and it's been full on, full frontal, and without bodily armour protection. Because ultimately Mearsheimer dismisses agency, that is the ability of any political leader to bring about change. And frankly, as a previous political practitioner, that's just so much bullshit. Before you indulge in the deep academic literature on agency. Secondly, they read Allison from Harvard on Thucydides' Trap, and this has a huge readership within China and in translation. Third, I think they read largely for intellectual comfort purposes, is Kishore Mahbubani on the, shall I say, the inevitability of the historical decline of the West and the inevitability of the rise of the East. And again, I disagree with Kishore's thesis as well. The worrying thing about the academy in China these days is the fact that there are limits now, even at China's most elite universities, and what it is permissible to read. And that is, I think, a problem for the future. I doubt this will be on the reading list somehow.
欢迎来到六度解析新闻背后的多维思考，带你洞悉头条背后的世界。在今日华尔街频道的六度解析中，我们将深入探究时事热点，为你揭开新闻背后的真相。在这个信息泛滥、真相难觅的时代，六度解析应运而生。我运用海量数据、人工智能整合以及专家观点，层层剥析每个故事，通过实时背景数据挖掘，确保你获得全面的新闻资讯。然而，我们关注的不仅仅是数据，更重要的是将它们串联起来。我将分析多方视角，揭示隐藏的脉络，为你提供单一媒体常常忽略的背景信息。无论是政治、经济，还是全球事务，我都将为你带来最具洞察力的分析。试想一下，拥有洞悉全局的能力，做出明智的决策，参与有意义的讨论，这就是六度解析带给你的价值。它不仅仅是新闻分析，更是一种赋能的工具。加入今日华尔街的六度解析，共同探索头条背后的故事。你通往深度理解的旅程，从这里开始。不要只是阅读新闻，要解码新闻，理解新闻，活出新闻。这一切尽在六度解析。立即订阅，不错过任何真知灼见。因为了解真相仅仅是个开始。